Well, croeso I sesiwn sgwrsio heno. Welcome to tonight's In Conversation session. Wales for Europe is a cross-party and non-party campaigning organisation, and our mission is to improve our links with our European neighbours. We're a standalone organisation, but we are also affiliated to the UK-wide European movement. I would like to introduce our chair, Dr. Charles Smith from Bridgend, who is on screen at the moment. But we do have some apologies from our committee members. We've got apologies from our president, Anthony Slaughter, and from two of our directors, Phil Dorr, and also from Jason Higgins. I think most of the other directors are here. This is the latest in a series of events that Wales for Europe have held this year. And a number of people who have joined us tonight. This is the largest gathering we've had so far. I think there were over 60 that registered, and we generally have about half attending, and others then will watch on YouTube when it is available. But certainly this is quite a large gathering for us tonight, so I'm really pleased that you've been able to join us. Now then, this may be a reflection of our growing activities recently in Wales, but I suspect it also has much to do with our guest speaker, Guto Bebb. Guto is the Group Chief Executive of the Farmers Union for Wales, which includes FUW Insurance Services. Guto is therefore well placed to talk about tonight's topic, which is the impact of Brexit on the agricultural sector and on farmers in Wales. Guto is also the interim chair of S4C. However, Guto has an interesting background prior to joining the FUW, which will also be of interest to our members and to our other supporters who have joined us tonight. Guto was the Conservative MP for Aberconwy between 2010 and 2019. During that time, and please correct me, Guto, if I get any of this wrong, but I have been relying on Wikipedia.
It's all wrong.
Must be true. During that time, Guto served as Parliamentary Under Secretary of State at the Wales Office between 2016 and 2018, and as Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Defence Procurement at the Ministry of Defence from January 2018 until he resigned in July 2018. Of particular interest to us was that Guto had the Conservative whip removed on the 3rd of September 2019 by Boris Johnson, alongside 20 of his colleagues, such as esteemed people such as Rory Stewart, Ken Clarke, Nicholas Soames, Philip Hammond, Dominic Grieve, Oliver Letwin, all of whom had supported an emergency motion to allow the House of Commons to take control of parliamentary business away from the government, to allow for the passage of the European Union Withdrawal Bill to be introduced by Hilary Benn the following day. On a personal basis, I've known many of the Caernarfon-based Bebbs for many years, having worked with Guto's uncle and with his cousin. I also taught Guto, as well as his wife, when they were both first-year students at Aberystwyth University during the late 1980s. I therefore look forward to hearing from Guto tonight and to hear his responses to questions from the audience later on. Our In Conversation sessions usually last an hour, but tonight we've set an hour and a half aside, and we will finish promptly at 8:30. If we've finished before then we'll see how it goes. Could I also briefly mention our next In Conversation, which will be with Tom Jones of Plas Coch Dolanog, Montgomeryshire. There will be more information to follow next week, but this will be held on Thursday, the 14th of November, again on Zoom. Ond mae'n bleser gen i gyflwyno Guto a gofyn I ti annych y gynulleidfa sydd wedi ymuno hefo ni ar draws Cymru ac yn ehangach. It is my pleasure to introduce Guto and to ask you to speak to the audience who has joined us from across Wales and beyond. Guto.
Well, diolch yn fawr iawn am y cyflwyniad. Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, it is a long time since I was a first-year student in Aberystwyth. I'm feeling very old because even my youngest is now in his second year in Aberystwyth. So the family tradition has certainly carried on supporting Aberystwyth University, and I think Aberystwyth used to have a claim to fame that it had the highest number of students ending up marrying each other. And for those of you who don't know Aberystwyth very well, the geography of Aberystwyth means that once you're there, you're a bit stuck. So, if you need to find a girlfriend or a boyfriend, then Aberystwyth is the place to go, I would argue, because you're stuck there for the duration of the term. But I'm not complaining, having been married for a long time now, so I'm not complaining. But thank you for the introduction, and you have reminded me of the famous the Ben Act, which did take control of the parliamentary order paper from the government. That might have been due to the Speaker of the day allowing us to do things that we really shouldn't have been doing. But it is interesting to note that the so-called Ben Bill was actually written by a combination of Oliver Letwin and none other than our Prime Minister. And I can say that because I was in the room at the time, because when I did resign from the MOD, having lost any confidence in Theresa May's ability to stand up to the ERG. I did end up, because of the 18 months I spent in the whip's office, I ended up being the unofficial whip for the Rebel Alliance, as we called ourselves. And not once did I promise that we would win a vote that we didn't win. But I was also very honest in saying when we couldn't win a vote. But that's a long time ago. So just to give you some background then, yes, Carolyn is absolutely right in saying I am the Group Chief Executive of the Farmers Union of Wales. For those of you who are not aware of the background of the Farmers Union of Wales, the Farmers Union of Wales broke away from the NFU back in 1955, and 68 years later, we're still going strong. The reason why the FUW was established was primarily because of tree planting in Carmarthenshire. So nothing is ever new in politics, as you know. Tree planting in a Welsh context is now a very interesting subject, to say the least. But the FUW was established on the back of a feeling that the NFU were not really representing the interests of small farmers in Wales, and that's why the FUW came into existence. I also want to stress that I am speaking in a personal capacity, not on behalf of the FUW, but I'd also like to make the point that the FUW had a very clear position during the Brexit referendum. The FUW came out very early in favour of a Remain vote and campaigned for a Remain vote. And that was a decision taken by the membership, because the FUW is a democratic organisation and the decisions we take have to be supported by the membership. And I make that point because quite clearly there is occasionally a view expressed that all farmers supported leave. I have no doubt that many farmers did support leave, but in the same way, many people from all walks of life supported leave. And I think it is important just to make the point that not every farmer had a leave poster in their field. And in terms of the FUW, obviously, as I've said, when I left Parliament, the opportunity came to work for FUW Insurance Services. So whilst I am in a position to speak about the impact of Brexit on Welsh farming, my day job is probably 60% financial services and about 40% on the lobbying and the work that we have to do from a policy perspective to make sure that we look after the interests of our members. The final point I would make just before we kickstart this process, I do think that it is important just to remember the point I've just made about farming not necessarily being wholly guilty of voting leave, because our previous First Minister, Mark Drakeford, a man I have a lot of time and respect for, is certainly guilty on occasion of saying that farmers and the troubles we are facing with Welsh Government at this point in time is very much, well, you reap what you sow. And I think it is unfortunate that those comments that come from various political parties, that farmers almost deserve the situation that we're now facing in terms of dealing with Brexit, because ultimately nobody can say whether farmers voted to leave or not, because there is no tick box in any ballot paper which says occupation, and you have to then say you're a farmer before you vote. What we do know, however, is that there are large parts of Wales who did vote to leave, and I'm not aware of any government proposition that those areas should be punished for allegedly voting leave. And therefore, I think it's slightly unfortunate that we do have the First Minister making comments such as farmers are reaping what they sowed when it comes to the issues that we're facing with a post-Brexit farming settlement. And the final thing I will say before I get started is that the FUW's position now is very much a case of we need to make Brexit work. That's not to say that we endorse Brexit. It's not to say that we think that Brexit was a good idea. But as the former president of the FEW often said, we are where we are. And therefore, on a day-to-day basis, we're trying to make sure that Brexit is at least mitigated as far as we can in terms of our membership. So that's the background. So just to get us started then, back in 2016, obviously, there's no doubt that EU funding and EU funding streams were incredibly important to Welsh farmers. And I'll try and explain why that's the case. In Wales, about 80% of the land is classed as severely disadvantaged or disadvantaged. Actually, about 57% is classified as severely disadvantaged and about 24% of disadvantaged. And that basically means that Wales is, to a very large extent, from a farming perspective, a country where beef and sheep farming is the main form of farming. Yes, we have counties where there are very strong dairy farming enterprises in place, Carmarthenshire, Pembrokeshire, Ceredigion in parts, and obviously there are some crops being grown as well. But when you compare the farming structure in Wales to England, for example, the less favoured land or the severely disadvantaged land in England is about 22%. Compared to our 80% here in Wales. And what that basically means is that back in 2016, something like 80% of farm profits came directly from direct grant funding from the CAP funds. And I see Richard wants to ask a question. So, Caroline, I'm not sure whether I take questions as we go along.
Yeah, Richard, do you want to come in and ask your question now? Do you want to unmute yourself?
My droop to be it was a mistake. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
No problem. No problem. No problem at all.
Yeah.
So back in 2016, then roughly 80% of Welsh farm profits were derived from the direct funding model that we had in Wales, utilising CAP funding, CAP funding. I have to be very careful. I tend to talk in CAPs and SFSs, and nobody knows what I'm talking about. So the CAP, obviously, the Common Agricultural Policy. And back in 2016, on average, a Welsh farm made a profit of 24,000. So you can work out if 80% of that came from direct grants, then without the direct grant structure, then the average Welsh farm would be making a profit of approximately £5,000. So you can immediately see that Brexit has the potential to be very damaging to Welsh agriculture. So what do we need to do moving forward, and what are the challenges to Welsh farmers from the Brexit situation? Well, first of all, obviously, we have an obligation to try and ensure that the promises made by successive governments now to match the level of CAP funding is actually delivered upon. And by matching, obviously, you can always talk about matching being, well, how much money were we getting when we left the EU? But you can also ask yourself the question, well, when was the last time Wales had a settlement in terms of CAP funding? And the answer to that is 2014. So back in 2014, European funding, direct funding for Welsh farming was worth around 350 million a year. So if you want a standstill agreement with the government in 2024, we're probably asking for about 500 million from the UK Treasury. And those of you who are aware of the UK Treasury's view of farming, in effect, the Treasury, HM Treasury, in my view, has never really been supportive of direct farm funding of any sort whatsoever. In an UK context, farming is a very small portion of the economy. And I think that the CAP funding and the direct funding via the European purse was very much something that the Treasury were willing to accept, because it was some of the funding coming from the UK to the EU, coming back to the UK. So it's going to be quite a challenge for the sector to win a settlement from Westminster, which will be equal to the 2014 CAP settlement, and it'll be an even further challenge to get that settlement adjusted for inflation. But that's the ask that we have, and it's also the ask that the NFU have. But it's a bit more complicated than that, because, as you know, generally speaking, Wales is funded on the basis of the Barnett formula. Now, the problem with the Barnett formula in an agricultural context is that the CAP funding coming back to the UK was actually shared on the basis of the need to support agriculture in various parts of the United Kingdom. So whereas, roughly speaking, and even as a Wales Office Minister, this is just a rough way of explaining Barnett, but roughly speaking, if you spent £100 on the health service in England, then Wales would get a £5. When it came to agricultural funding, the figures are completely different. Something like 9.5% of all CAP funding coming into the UK used to come to Wales. And compared to the percentage of agricultural spend in England, something like 14% is the equivalent coming into Wales. So we're in a difficult situation where not only do we want to persuade Westminster to provide a level of funding which was equal to what was provided by the European Union, but we also need to make sure that it's not Barnetized, because HM Treasury could very well decide to fund the English settlement on the same basis as what was funded when we were within the European Union, but that would be a cut of almost 50% of the funding coming to Wales. So it's a real challenge to try and persuade Westminster, and indeed to persuade Welsh Government, to make the argument on our behalf that any settlement coming from Westminster for the agricultural budget has to not only be adjusted for inflation, but we also don't want it to be Barnetized. And it becomes even more of a challenge because, as you know, or you might not know, but the FUW is also an organisation which is fully supportive of devolution. So we find this very, very challenging, because if you used to talk to the Westminster government 4 months ago, when it was a Conservative government, then quite often you would have a sort of half interested response to the question of, can you protect funding for Wales? Well, yes, of course, we can ring fence it. But the FUW were not very keen on ring fencing, because that's in itself an attack on devolution. And we don't want to be supporting an attack on devolution, because we support devolution as a principle. So what we're asking for from a funding perspective, in effect, is that we want to have a settlement which reflects CAP funding in 2014 plus inflation. We don't want that settlement subject to the Barnett formula. And in an ideal world, we want that funding protected for Welsh agriculture without demanding that it's ring-fenced. So the way we're the way we're describing our request is that we're asking for agricultural funding throughout the UK to be treated as EU legacy funding. And then as EU legacy funding, then you can have a share of funding based upon previous shares rather than on Barnett. So that's a complicated issue, but the reason why it's important is back to my first comment. Back in 2016, as I said, 80% of farm profits in Wales were derived from direct payments to farmers from the CAP funding. So it is important that we get this right, because if we don't get this right, then quite clearly we have a problem on our hands. And there's no denying that the situation is challenging for Welsh farming and Welsh agriculture at this point in time. There was a period, certainly post-COVID, when farm incomes did receive a significant boost. But at this point in time, what we're seeing very clearly is that farmers are struggling. And the fact that 2/3 of my staff work in the insurance business allows us to actually identify trends very quickly. And one of the trends that we've seen over the last 2 years is that the number of farmers who are now putting their insurance on instalment plans has increased dramatically. And that tells you really that the sector is suffering financial stress. So I can say, with some confidence that we need to get this right from a funding perspective moving forward. And just quickly, just to finish on the point of funding, some people have asked me, why do the NFU in Wales ask for 500 million and the FUW actually are asking for 450 million from the Westminster government? And the answer to that is that the FUW was very honest, because previously, in order to access EU agricultural funding, then the government in question distributing those funds had to provide 10% of the funding themselves. So if we think that 500 million is actually the sum that we're looking for, then Welsh Government would need to be finding about 10% of that, which is 50 million. So when the NFU asked for 500 and the FUW asked for 450 million, we're actually talking about the same calculation, but we're just being a bit more honest with Westminster in acknowledging that Welsh Government always contributed a portion of the funding that was allocated to agriculture when we were members of the European Union. So that's one clear area where Brexit is a clear and present danger to the agricultural sector in Wales. And it is concerning because there are parts of rural Wales where agriculture is actually the mainstay of the economy. If you did an impact assessment of the situation in rural Wales, agriculture might be a comparatively small portion of the direct economic impact. But when you look at the knock-on effect of agriculture within rural communities, it's pretty central to the well-being of communities in rural parts of Wales. So we need to get the funding right, but there are also other concerns that we have. And just to move on to some of those other concerns, as you are aware, agriculture was devolved back in 1999. So when the Scottish Government, the Welsh Assembly at the time, and the Northern Irish settlement was agreed in 1999, then agriculture was devolved to all three constituent nations. So we had a DEFRA policy in Westminster, and then obviously we had the agriculture policy from Welsh Government, Scottish Government, and Northern Ireland as well. Now, there's been no effort to grab back control of agriculture by Westminster, certainly not through the front door. But we need to be very aware that this is potentially a very dangerous area in terms of the ability of Welsh Government to do things differently and the ability to ensure that an agricultural policy in Wales reflects the needs of Wales. It is potentially a dangerous area that we're very aware of. It's not the main issue that we're concerned about at this point in time, but it is an issue that can become an issue for us. Now, under the old CAP, obviously, there were limits to what you could do with the funding, because once you were in with the Common Agricultural Policy, you had access to the European Single Market. The European Single Market is governed by the European Court of Justice, and quite clearly, therefore, there are limits to what you can do in terms of supporting businesses. But because we were all within a common framework, granted that common framework allowed some variety. So, for example, Welsh Government liked to move 15% of the funding from direct support to farmers to what they called Pillar 2, which was indirect environmental support, but that was fine. That was allowed within the CAP framework. Northern Ireland, for example, didn't allocate any money to Pillar 2. Scotland, I think, allocated 12%, England 10%, Wales was 15%, but it was all within an agreed structure of the Common Agricultural Policy. Now, the problem we might have moving forward is that we now have the four constituent nations of the United Kingdom trying to develop their own post-Brexit agricultural policy. And those agricultural policies should reflect, I would argue, the challenges in the constituent nations. So the needs of Welsh farmers would be very different, I would argue, to the needs of English farmers. English farmers are predominantly much larger in terms of area, much more crops and so forth in England than you have in Wales. So the idea that you have the four nations developing their own farming policies, on the face of it, makes perfect sense. And I would argue that at this point in time, the Scots have got it right from where the FOW is sitting. The Scots, for example, the Scottish Government have decided that 70% of their funding for support of farming, whatever that funding will be, because obviously they need to agree a settlement with Westminster as well. But the Scottish Government has decided that 70% of that will be allocated through a direct payment system. And when you look at Scotland, around 80% of the Scottish landmass is also less favoured. So it's very, very similar to Wales. And the decision in Scotland is to carry on supporting through direct payments. Now, the initial efforts in Wales resulted in the Sustainable Farming Scheme, which resulted in all the protests in February and March, if you remember. And the Sustainable Farming Scheme took a very different approach to the Scottish approach. There was no agreement on any base level of direct payments. And there was a significant element of the Welsh settlement which would have resulted in payments by results with regards to environmental work and so forth being undertaken by farmers. Now, obviously the FOW take a view, and the view of the FOW is that the scheme in Wales was not workable. But that's not the issue that I want to highlight this evening, because we can have a discussion as to whether the SFS is appropriate or not. That's not really the issue, because what you've asked me to speak upon is issues arising out of Brexit which might impact Welsh farming. And the crux of the issue that might create a problem for us in terms of the various agricultural support schemes that might come into existence in a post-Brexit United Kingdom is the way those schemes will then interact with the UK Internal Market Act. Because the UK government have rightly said that they need to protect the UK internal market. We are, after all, now a single entity of 68 million with four governments within that 68 million entity. And the idea being, obviously, you don't want to have a situation in which goods cannot flow freely within the United Kingdom. I personally find it very bizarre that that was a key demand of the Westminster government when it came to the UK internal market legislation, and yet they were very happy to have boundaries and borders at Dover. But that's an aside, and I'm sure you would probably agree with me on that point. But where this issue becomes problematic is at the moment, as I said, Wales and Scotland both have about 80% of our land mass, which is deemed to be less favourable. So that basically means that beef and sheep farming are predominant parts of farming in both Scotland and Wales. Yes, as I've mentioned, we have dairy, we have crops and so forth in parts of Wales, and they have undoubtedly got a very large potato sector in Scotland, but ultimately a large portion of farmers in Scotland will depend upon beef and sheep, and that is also the case in Wales. Now, the situation could arise that if the Scots go down the route of putting 70% of their farm funds or farm support funding into direct payments, and the situation in England is that there is nothing offered to direct payments, then it's entirely feasible that a beef and sheep farmer in Cumbria could say that the Scots are having an unfair advantage within the UK internal market, because in effect, the Scots would be getting a 70% contribution towards their costs coming from government's direct payments, whereas a hill farmer in Cumbria would be getting nothing. And so there's a real issue there as to the way in which our post-Brexit agricultural policies, even though on paper they're allowed to be developed within the Scottish Parliament, the Senedd, Northern Ireland and Westminster, there is a question as to whether that could lead to problems further down the line, because if we do have policies which diverge significantly, then it could be argued that that in effect could create an unfair advantage or an advantage to farmers in some part of the United Kingdom. So that's an issue that we're worried about, not in the medium term, not in the short term, certainly, because in the short term, we need to make sure that we have the funding necessary to make the SFS work, and we need to make sure that we have a scheme in Wales that can be supported by Welsh farmers. But it is an issue that worries us in the longer term, because ultimately what we have seen with the previous governments in Westminster is that when it came to an issue of we need to have an uniform approach on a UK basis, then that uniform approach would be the English approach rather than the Welsh, Scottish or Northern Irish approach. And I think that is potentially problematic, especially in view of the fact that the type of farming we have in Wales and the type of farming we have in Scotland is very different to what we have in England. The English model has definitely gone down the route of payments for environmental services. The initial Welsh proposals were very similar. I suspect that we will see a halfway house in Wales in due course, which will probably be better from our perspective as a union. But in the long term, we need to think very carefully about the potential impact of that if anybody decided to challenge the way that worked in the context of having a single internal UK market. So that's an issue that has yet to come and bite us, but I think we need to be aware of that possibility. So that's just an aside, just something to think about. It then brings me on to our relationship with our largest export market, because our largest export market for a very long time was the European Union, and the European Union remains our largest export market. It's not particularly a growing market, but it remains the largest market that we have. And just to give you a context on that, something like 35% of all Welsh lamb is actually exported. So 35% of all Welsh lamb production is actually exported, and 90% of that goes to the European Union. So you can imagine immediately that the importance of getting a tariff-free agreement was of paramount importance to the farming sector here in Wales. So it's not often I'll say anything nice about the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. I think his agreement was poor, verging on disastrous, but it's fair to say that it could have been worse. There was a genuine effort within government to push for the possibility of a no-deal exit, and the no-deal exit would have resulted in tariffs on Welsh lamb, Welsh beef, Welsh dairy products, which would have been very difficult for any sector to deal with. To be perfectly frank, a no-deal Brexit would have decimated the Welsh lamb sector and the Welsh beef sector. So I'm offering no credit whatsoever to the agreement that was reached, but all I'm saying to you is that it could have been worse. And the fact that it could have been worse tells you probably that putting up barriers with one of your largest markets is never a clever thing to do. So From a perspective of the trade deal, the situation we're in is, as I said, about 35% of Welsh lamb is exported. When it comes to beef and dairy products, which are the predominant areas of production in Wales, in addition to lamb, the UK is about 65% self-sufficient when it comes to beef. So you could argue, therefore, there's a huge potential market for us there, but yet we still have a significant export market when it comes to beef as well. And about 90% of our beef export market is also to the European Union. And dairy is similar. We're about 75% self-sufficient when it comes to dairy, but we do have a significant export market. And believe it or not, it's the same figure again. It's just under 90% of our dairy exports goes to the European Union. So that tariff-free access to the European Union was absolutely essential. And I do stress the word tariff-free. It is not frictionless access to the European Union. Because what we have seen as a result of the agreements formed between the Boris Johnson administration and the European Union is that we do have access to the European market. That access is tariff-free, subject to the correct paperwork being in place, and subject to Welsh farmers obviously ensuring that their quality control, their health controls, their animal well-being controls are in keeping with EU legislation. So in terms of taking back control, we are still obviously fully dependent upon making sure that our production for export is in keeping with the demands of the export market. So when people said, well, there's far too many rules and regulations coming from an EU perspective, so we need to escape all of those rules and regulations, the reality is if you want to export to a market which applies rules and regulations, then you must make sure that you abide by those rules and regulations. And the same is true in terms of paperwork. There has been a significant increase in paperwork challenges for exporters. There's no doubt that our export sector has managed to come to grips with those challenges, but there is a significant amount of concern and annoyance within the sector, within the agricultural sector, when we see that several years now after the agreements between the EU and the Johnson administration, we're in a situation where from day one, the European Union were ready to deal with the paperwork, ready to deal with their checks, ready to make sure that our products were in keeping with the regulatory demands of the European Union. 3 years later, that is not the case with imports of food from the European Union to the United Kingdom. 3 years later. So I don't want to be hammering the point too hard, but I think it's fair to say that what we've actually seen is that as a result of Brexit, the European Union have undoubtedly taken back control of their own borders, and the United Kingdom have failed to take any control whatsoever of its borders. And so we're in a situation where we can have a load, and I will take the question, I'll just finish this point. We're in a situation where a load of lamb carcasses can be turned back at the border because one of them has fallen on the floor of the lorry, and therefore that means that the whole consignment has to be rechecked. And yet imports from the European Union, so coming through Holyhead, for example, you can't miss those lorries carrying Irish meat products to the UK market, and there is no border control whatsoever. So I'll happily take a couple of questions at this point.
Okay.
Yes, Guto.
So John and then Porag. John.
Wonderful, thanks. Guto, yeah, thank you very much for all that. That's great. As you correctly brought out, not my sector, but I do follow this kind of stuff quite avidly. They've delayed the import Brexit, the real Brexit, yet again, and totally ignored the fact that the EU has told them, no, we will not have any improvement on the Brexit deal regarding things like veterinary checks and all that kind of stuff until we actually implement Brexit, yes, which is the import checks into the UK. It's very sad. And you mentioned imports of meat from Ireland. The bit you didn't mention is import of meat unfit for consumption in the EU from places further afield. With absolutely no checks at all. It could be as rotten as anything, full of maggots, and they still let it in.
And again, I wouldn't disagree with anything you've said. We are very concerned about the fact that there's so little controls that we're in effect allowing not only competitors from the EU to be able to deal with us without the challenges that our exporters have to deal with, but you're absolutely right. There's very little control in place in terms of imports of substandard products from any part of the world. So in terms of a government which said at the time that they were in a position to do a no-deal Brexit, we're ready for a no-deal Brexit, you know, a very poor deal, and 3-4 years later, we're still not in a position to implement the deal that was agreed. So I can only agree with you. We have written on a consistent basis as a union to the various departments of government in Westminster, highlighting our concerns about animal health standards. If there was a significant health issue arising out of tainted meat, for example, it would undoubtedly have a negative effect on the agricultural sector in Wales as well, because people don't think, oh, I've had a very poor experience with the chicken, so therefore I'm going to blame the Mexican chicken in question. They're going to basically just say, well, poultry farming is dirty, not nice, so therefore the fact that Welsh standards of production are absolutely equivalent to EU standards is not going to be the issue. If you've had salmonella as a result of something nasty that came in from another part of the world, it's the agricultural sector that would be blamed. So we have highlighted these concerns, I'm afraid, with very little success.
Yeah.
On the sort of extra to this, if I may, we've all noticed the lack of food on shelves, the quality of the food on the shelves, and its very, very short shelf life, a lot of which is rotting in the shops before you've even picked it up. It's horrendous. And as soon as they implement Brexit for real, i.e. the import checks, a lot of places will just stop exporting to the UK. They'll say, fine, come and get it. You bring it into the UK, and if it sits in port for 3 weeks and rots in the truck, it's your money down the drain, not mine.
And I have no doubts that that's the reality of the situation, which is governing the decision to postpone time and time again. And it is, from our perspective, slightly disappointing that no government is giving us any real support on this issue. Our initial discussions with the new administration hasn't been particularly useful in terms of accepting that there is an issue here. But ultimately, I'm just highlighting what are some of the issues. You know, the question I was asked was what's the impact upon the farming sector? And you're absolutely right in highlighting that it's even worse, perhaps, than some of the stuff I'm highlighting.
Exactly.
So-
As a party,
so
what a load of Brexit, eh?
Well, I won't go there because obviously we want to make it work now because it has to for the time being.
Thank you very much for your questions, John. Can I just quickly, we did have two other hands up, they've gone down. Morag, do you want to come in, and then Gareth?
Yes, thank you. Guto, thank you very much, first of all, for supporting us over the years, and thank you also for joining us this evening. As you can tell, I'm one of the Irish nationals sitting here in South Wales with Wales for Europe, I think, since about 2017. Just thinking about the decision in 2022, I think it was July 4, 2022, in the middle of Pinchergate, when, with the press distracted by the shenanigans with West Pincher, Keir Starmer ruled out customs union single market, which to me felt astonishingly ill-timed, irrelevant, and unnecessary. What do you think about that? Do you see that as being a way for Starmer to attract the attention of Murdoch, who was invited by his birthday the following year? Was it essential? Or what was going on there? Do you think Starmer has any to roll up in that position? Thank you, Guto.
Yes, that's an interesting question. I'm not in a position to answer. I think I dropped into the conversation at the start of the discussion the fact that the Benn Act was actually produced by a combination of Oliver Letwin and Keir Starmer, just to make the point that Keir Starmer's subsequent embrace of Brexit has been as astonishing to me as it has been for many people in the Labour Party, I have no doubt. It is problematic because the customs union would solve many problems for us. When you look at the opportunities that people talk about for Welsh agricultural produce, yes, there are some opportunities out there, but the figures speak for themselves. You know, when you're talking about 90% plus of all our exports going to the European Union, everything else is going to be peripheral. Yes, if you can have a niche market for Welsh lamb at a certain time of year in the Arab states, then fantastic. In the Gulf states, that's fantastic. If there is a success story for organic Welsh dairy products in Japan, which has been the case for Aberconwy, which is a company managed by our deputy president. Just give him a little advert there. Aberconwy have actually managed to get some niche markets in Japan for their dairy products. Now, all of that is a bonus. But ultimately, as any business knows, if 90% of your sales go to a certain market, then you should be prioritizing that market. So our view as an union is very much of the case that we should have a process in place which is not dissimilar to a customs union agreement, at the very least. I think we all accept that any arguments to rejoin at this point in time would probably be met with no thank you from the European Union, and I wouldn't blame them. But I think the customs union could be a way forward for us. I think that the concern of Labour members of Parliament about the Reform Party and the views of some of their constituents who were tempted by Boris Johnson in 2019 is playing a part in all of this, because the customs union and the single market, the two of them, the customs union would be a step in the right direction, single markets would be ideal, but obviously the single market is probably handicapped by the fact that freedom of movements would come with that agreement to a very large extent. So I can't speak on behalf of the Labour Party. I can only say that I'm not getting a nod and a wink from Labour MPs that I'm meeting. I was reporting to the Grand Council of the FUW this afternoon that since the general election, we met with 19 of the 32 Welsh MPs, and the vast majority of those have been newly elected Labour MPs. But we're not getting a nod and the wink, and people saying, well, you wait and see, just hold fire. You will see us coming forward with some propositions. We're not getting anything of that nature. So at this point in time, I'm highlighting the fact that we're having to make the best of a poor deal, but that poor deal is still better than a no-deal Brexit. So, I took the stand I took in Westminster on the basis that I would not support a no-deal Brexit under any circumstances. And, we didn't end up with a no-deal Brexit, and that was still, it's a small win for the agricultural sector.
Thank you, Guto.
You're on mute, Karen. So I'll carry on then, I think.
Sorry,
yes.
Sorry, I didn't realise I was on mute. Sorry, thank you for responding to those questions. Quick question from Gareth, and then we'll let Guto finish off his presentation.
That's
Gareth?
fine.
Yes, I'm very interested in the situation in Holyhead. That is, I live near the A55. I see the lorries. These are all in transit. How do they come through transit? The other interesting thing is that quite a few of them are obviously from Northern Ireland, not from the Republic. How does this affect our situation in Wales?
Well, I'm not really in a position to answer, because quite clearly the situation from our perspective is that if Irish beef is coming into the UK market, then that's perfectly fine under the agreements that we have with the EU. But they should be subject to the same checks as, and no disrespect to our Irish member of the audience, I have no doubts that Irish beef is perfectly safe. Welsh beef and Irish beef is produced to the same standards, because we still produce to EU standards. So the difficulty for us is that the paperwork that we have to complete in order to export, for example, to the European continent, is not something that has to be done by Irish exporters into the UK. And you are right in saying that there is obviously still a trade between Northern Ireland and the UK, which comes via the Republic. That again is not really in keeping with even the Windsor framework, is my understanding of the situation. I am depending upon my policy team for that, but my understanding is that that shouldn't be the case. But that's certainly what we're seeing from a Holyhead perspective. And obviously, as you know, there was land taken in Holyhead in order to have a border control post, but they haven't even cut ground.
Yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn. Tisio cario ymlaen, Guto?
So we've mentioned the Boris deal with the EU then, so it is a poor deal, but it was better than nothing. Which brings me on to the last thing that really does concern us from Brexit. And the issue that concerns us from a Brexit perspective is the concept of the global Britain and international trade deals. Because ultimately, this takes me back to a comment made by Glyn Roberts, one of our previous presidents. Now, Glyn was a constituent of mine when I was an MP. He used to tell me, you're a very good MP, but I'll never vote for you, which was very nice of him. And I don't think he ever did. But I remember Glyn telling me, asking me a question once. Could you name the best agriculture minister we ever had? And I thought long and hard. I threw a couple of names at him, and he said, no. The answer is whoever happens to be the French agricultural minister. And it was a very good argument, because the point he was making is that there are some countries in the European Union which really does care about the farming sector. And more than that, obviously, they're also potentially in some countries scared of the farming sector. And France does come to mind as a country which has been very protective of the farming sector. And it could be argued that the CAP is very difficult to justify. The percentage of the EU budget that goes into the CAP is potentially difficult to justify. But that's not a line I would take in the job that I have. And from a farming perspective in Wales, the CAP wasn't perfect, but the CAP did mean that there was an argument in favour of protecting agriculture as part of trade deals. And I think what really concerns the agricultural sector when it comes to the concept of global Britain is that when the European Union has to negotiate trade deals, to a very large extent, they really have to pay real attention to the views and the demands of individual nation states. And indeed, it goes much lower than that. There was the famous issue when the Canadian trade deal with the European Union was held up by the government of Wallonia. I was in Namur over the weekend. I like going to Belgium, and Namur obviously is the seat of the Walloon Parliament. And the Canadian trade deal with the European Union was held up because of dairy interests in Wallonia. And there's nothing wrong with that, in my view. The Canadians were very frustrated, and I understand their frustration, because the Canadians also have a very grown-up view of how to do trade deals. The Canadians consult with the provinces before then having a remit, to go out and start negotiations. So it's not a case that you do an agreement and then you ask dairy farmers in Quebec, what do you think about this? It's a case they go and ask the government of Quebec, what will your dairy farmers want, and what will they be willing to accept? So I can understand I can understand the frustrations of the Canadians, because in terms of how they do trade deals, they're an exemplar, I would argue. They consult first and then go out and start to negotiate a deal. But when you look at the European Union, the idea that the European Union is this organisation that imposes decisions upon people is put to task by the way in which the Wallonia Parliament could actually hold up a trade deal covering the whole of the European Union because they were unhappy with it. Now, that is a concern, because I have absolutely no doubt that the two trade deals that were signed when we had a fantastic trade minister called Liz Truss in place were signed up, and the agricultural sector was sacrificed in order to say that we had got deals. Now, I see that there's a hand up for a question. More than happy to take a question, and then I'll finish my comments about the two trade deals, because the two trade deals in question are incredibly dangerous for the Welsh agricultural sector.
Okay, Laura, do you want to come in quickly?
Very quickly, Guto, one of the unusual things about the UK compared to, say, France and many other countries is that land, in particular agricultural land, is a very invaluable asset class. It's a place to spend money, to save on tax. And that's precisely why farms in England have become enormous. They're basically a place to rent, but it's a great place to store land because it's a great place for accountancy purposes. Do you think that affects the treatment of land in the UK? Does that affect the way agriculture is treated so differently from how it is in Ireland, for example, and particularly in France? Is it the fact that the actual land itself, yes, it's for creating food, but its bigger value is as an asset class, as a tax accountancy? Yeah.
I think you made a very important point, because I think that's one of the reasons why HM Treasury are so annoyed with the whole concept of supporting farming. Because I think some of the tax breaks which have been afforded over the years, for understandable reasons, by the way, some of the tax breaks in question are perfectly understandable. If you're a small Welsh family farm and then you have inheritance tax imposed, then your farm's not going to be sustainable. Precisely. But it was remarkable, really. We had a delegation from the Irish Farmers Union come over to the Royal Welsh to meet with the FUW this year. And we took them on a visit on the Sunday evening to a farm, not a huge farm, it's about 280 acres. So not a very large farm, probably slightly above average in a Welsh context. And the response from the farmers, the Irish farmers from Wexford, they were all from County Wexford. Oh, 280 acres, that's a really large farm. So the different attitudes in terms of how they perceive the accumulation of land was quite apparent from that discussion.
That's right.
So I do think that you're right in highlighting the fact that some of the tax breaks afforded to land ownership are detrimental to the way in which we utilise land, but it's also detrimental to the way in which some important levers of government look upon support for agriculture as well. Now, one of the things that's very important is that, again, this is the advantage of running an insurance business as part of a farming union. One of our, obviously the NFU Mutual is by far the biggest player in the insurance market, but we're apparently the largest specialist agricultural broker. And we have partnerships with almost all of the specialist agricultural insurers. And they would say to us, it's incredible, your joint equal. There's a company called FarmWeb, and they would say to us, you're always first or second in terms of our biggest partner. What's different, though, is that our biggest partner is based in England. On average, their premiums are twice as high as yours. And the reason for that is the farms in England are much bigger than farms in Wales. So it could be argued that, for example, the FUW argued that Welsh governments under CAP should cap payments to farmers. So we had a position where payments were capped. So therefore, once the cap was imposed, then that money went back into the first 50 hectares, which is about 100 acres. So we had a system within CAP, which basically was there to try and benefit smaller farmers. And if you contrast that with what was done in England by DEFRA, you had all the stories in the newspapers about James Dyson getting 15 million from the CAP. And that's the difference. So you could argue that the FUW made a big difference to smaller farmers in Wales, and it is the case. If you look at the size of England and the population of England and the number of farms, there's about twice as many farms in Wales as you'd expect if Wales was simply part of England. So that is testament to the fact that we have managed to have some policies implemented in Wales within CAP which have been useful. But it's also the fact that the whole purpose of a union like the FUW is to argue for the existence of small family farms, because ultimately you've got a 20,000 acre estate. It's not going to create the employment that 2,000 small farms would do on the same landmass. So our view is, from an FUW perspective, our view is that part and parcel of the community of rural Wales is having a vibrant farming community. So I do accept your point about the way in which land is taxed. And I also think that that's also problematic because it creates a problem for us in terms of the perception of some civil servants in the Treasury who take an intense disliking to agricultural support because they think they get all these tax breaks and they want money. So, but back to the Liz Truss trade deals. Back to the Liz Truss trade deals.
So just to explain as well, Porag may be living in South Wales, three miles up the road from me, but I think Porag, you were brought up on an Irish farm, weren't you?
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
So
and actually, Guto, do you remember an Irish MEP called T.J. Maher? Does that name ring a bell?
Well, the Maher surname does, but I'm not sure why.
Well, he was topped the poll in 1979 and 84, etc. He went independent and basically collected the farming vote in the south of Ireland, and I think he was second only to Paisley. Paisley topped the poll in the whole of the EEC at the time. But my family backed him primarily, and my earliest memories, age 4, were standing in front of billboards for him, and my mum driving the car and all that kind of nonsense. I just bring him up because of the connection. I thought you would have recognised the name. But thank you.
Yes.
Okay, right. So if you can finish.
I'm on my last comments then. So the Liz Truss trade deals. The Liz Truss trade deals, the one with Australia and New Zealand, were incredibly dishonestly packaged. They are worth very, very little to the UK economy. By the Treasury's own estimates, they're worth almost nothing to the UK economy. But from a government's position of showing that Brexit was working, they were seen as very important. Now, just to put this in context, we argued very strongly that open access within 10 years for Australian beef and sheep meat is hugely problematic for the Welsh economy. And the response we had from government was, well, why would the New Zealanders and the Australians want to sell to the United Kingdom when they have such a huge market in China on their doorstep? Now, just to put that in context, I think I'm right in saying that London to Beijing is 5,000 miles. Wellington to Beijing is 6,700 miles. So in terms of the doorstep, China is actually closer to the UK than it is to New Zealand. So that's a dishonest argument to start with. But ultimately, why did the New Zealanders and why did the Australians want trade deals with the UK? Well, I happen to know. George Brandis used to be the High Commissioner, the Australian High Commissioner. I used to get on very well with him. I used to go and give him briefings on how, well, I remember saying to him once that Dominic Grieve would outfox Dominic Cummings. I was actually correct, by the way, because the Ben bill did outfox, undoubtedly did outfox Dominic Cummings, but then the Liberal Democrats decided that they wanted a general election, and that was the end of that. But George Brandis was the Australian High Commissioner, and he explained it very simply. You know, obviously their view was that if Brexit happened, they wanted a trade deal with us. And he said, you know, the truth of the matter is, yes, our obvious markets might be in Asia. Our ideal markets might be in Asia, but we did learn our lesson when the Chinese overnight imposed tariffs on our wine production. And when the Chinese imposed tariffs on the Australian wine production overnight, what they knew was that they couldn't be dependent. So the arguments that he gave to me very simply was that what the Australians were looking for in a trade deal with the UK was an insurance policy. And the insurance policy is a remarkable one when you think about it, because what they've achieved is within 7 years now, because we're already 3 years since the deals were signed, within 3 years, the Australians and the New Zealanders will have open access to the UK markets. Open access for lamb, open access for beef. Production standards are not equivalent. I don't care what anybody says. I have been to New Zealand as part of the Welsh Select Committee years ago. You know, if a farmer allows, if an ewe is giving birth and dies on the side of a mountain, a farmer in Wales would be in trouble. In New Zealand, if that happens, that happens. It's just one of those things. You know, you could go to a farm in New Zealand where they'd be running a flock of 3,000 ewes with a father and a son. A flock of 3,000 in Wales would be huge. And so therefore the welfare standards are not equivalent. So what's been agreed by the UK government is that the agricultural sector in Wales and the UK was something that could be sacrificed for the benefit of a trade deal, which would make the headlines for a few days. Now that trade deal is uniquely dangerous to Welsh agriculture, and the problem is that it's a slow burner. And I think, you know, the most disappointing report I saw was the Welsh Select Committee report in the last Parliament, which highlighted that they didn't foresee any challenges to the Welsh agricultural sector from these trade deals for at least 5 years. Well, you know, that was the evidence that we gave as a farming union. We weren't arguing that there was a danger coming down the line immediately, but what's been created by those two trade deals is a potential time bomb. Now, if the relationship between Australia and New Zealand and the emerging nations of Asia and the Pacific, if that carries on to be a happy relationship, then those trade deals will not have a significant impact upon Welsh agriculture. But if those relationships deteriorate for any reason, and it has happened when China, as I said, imposed tariffs on Australian wine, then the potential impact of dumping of products, of agricultural products onto the UK market is a severe danger to the sector here in Wales. So again, what we've seen with Brexit is an opportunity to forge a new way of doing trade deals. And actually what happened was that we had a deal imposed upon us. I remember the Trade Minister, Greg Hans, asking for a meeting with the FUW on the Wednesday. We met them on the Thursday morning, and they told us what the outline of the deal was. And that was it. No consultation in advance, no request from Welsh Government for their asks, no question as to what was important for the Welsh economy. It was a case of, good morning, FUW, this is a fantastic deal. Imagine you can sell your lamb to New Zealand now. Well, you know, it's like carrying coals to Newcastle in the old days, isn't it, really? So the reality is, my concern about the way those trade deals were done is that they were done for purposes other than the benefit of the economy, and certainly they weren't done for the benefit of the agricultural sector. Now, and I'll finish with this, we have seen some movements over recent months under the previous government to acknowledge that they made mistakes. So they have been much more careful in their negotiations with Canada. But I have to say that the New Zealand and the Australian experience doesn't give me any confidence that Westminster will take into account the needs of Welsh agriculture when it comes to future trade deals. So those are the main issues that I wanted to highlight: funding, new agricultural policy post-Brexit, the way in which we trade with our largest markets, and of course, the danger of future trade deals. So those are the areas I wanted to highlight. So I'm more than happy to take questions for the next half hour.
Diolch yn fawr iawn i chdi, Guto. Really, really grateful for that. It's been really, really useful, and I'm sure, well, I know the members and those present will really appreciate the the expertise and the way you've explained things in detail is exactly what the members were asking for in terms of understanding in detail from people with direct experience what the impact of Brexit has been on a particular sector. And this is the sort of sessions we want in the future on other sectors as well. So diolch yn fawr iawn I chdi, Guto. Okay, right, I've got one hand up at the moment, though I do appreciate, John, you've had a few goes already. But I will be generous to you. If there are others who would like to ask questions of Guto on agriculture, or I'm also fascinated by what happened in Parliament in 2019 as well, and I will allow questions on that, but I will limit it to those two elements. And it's just gone 8 o'clock now, so we will finish definitely 8:30. If we finished and exhausted the questions before that, then we will bring it to an end a little bit earlier. So I'll ask if there are any further questions. If you could put your cameras on and put your hands up, and I'll take you in order. But while you're having a think about that, I'll bring John in again.
Two very quick points, because I know I've had quite a bit of your time already, Guto.
Good.
It's one little point that I'm very keen on making to a lot of people is, let's stop saying our European neighbours. Let's take a European approach and call them our fellow Europeans. There is no difference between a Frenchman, an Italian, a Welshman, an Englishman. We're the same. We're all made by the same God, whether you believe in him or not. Right? So let's start using that phrase. And if we use it in all our discussions in the UK, it's going to reinforce the point there is no difference. We're all European. That's one. Number two, when are the farming unions going to actually learn from our fellow Europeans and their farming unions? And blocking roads, opening trucks and spilling the contents out on the road and things like that. They do it in France, they do it in Germany, they do it in Belgium. Why the hell haven't you guys done that in the UK?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. So generally speaking, it's a difficult one. We had this challenge in February and March. One of the questions often asked in the protests in February and March, where are the unions? Well, the actual reality is the unions were involved in detailed discussions with the government, and we told the government that the SFS was going to be a car crash. We couldn't have been clearer that the SFS was going to be a car crash. In the same way, we highlighted that there are seething issues within the sector. There's an anger within the sector, especially towards Welsh government, I have to say, with regards to something like the NVZ rules. This is the how to clean up our waterways. Nobody would disagree with the need to clean up our waterways. National Resource Wales recommended that 8% of the Welsh landmass needed to have NVZ regulations in place. Welsh government imposed it on 100%. So you have the same requirements to clean up your farm if you're a 600 cow dairy, factory in parts of South Wales, as you do if you're a 40 cattle and 300 sheep on the side of Tryfan in Snowdonia, which makes no sense whatsoever. And yet the resources then spent on enforcing the regulations against the farmers in Snowdonia in the same way as it's utilised against the 600 cattle dairy farm in other parts of the country. So there is an anger there towards Welsh government. From an union perspective, we wouldn't really want to find ourselves in a situation where we're not working with Welsh government until we've exhausted every opportunity. And it could be argued that we are still round the table with Welsh government. We're working on Chatham House rules basis. I'm not even aware of some of the discussions going on between the President and our head of policy, because they're in the room. And when they come out of the room, they can give me an indication of how things are going, but they are doing everything on the basis of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. So the answer to your question is, from an union perspective, we have the year of Welsh government at this point in time. We didn't previously. I don't think we have got the year of Westminster. But if you look at the situation in England, some farmers are very happy with the settlement in an English context. It has to be said. So therefore, if you go to Cumbria and if you go to some of the less favoured areas in England, the agricultural system which has been implemented in England is causing real problems and real issues for those rural communities. But in other parts of England, they're throwing so much, for example, There are stories of 800-acre farms being left to become wildflower meadows. People making more money than they would if they were farming them intensely. Now, with that sort of funding being thrown at an issue, some people are quite satisfied with what governments are doing. So the answer to your question is, whilst from an union perspective, whilst we still think that we have the opportunity to influence the new policy in a Welsh context, we carry on trying to be on the inside. But there is an anger out there, especially with regards to the TB issue and the NVZ issue, which could become problematic to Welsh governments in particular. And it's a shame, because I was disappointed personally when we saw some farmer leaders happily turning up and having their pictures taken with Rishi Sunak at the height of the crisis in Wales, because I have not seen anything to give me huge confidence in Welsh government and their support for Welsh agriculture, but I've seen nothing from a Westminster perspective to persuade me that they care anymore about Welsh agriculture. So we do need to be careful, but you are right. The French have always been militant. The Dutch were recently very militant as well, and they do seem to be able to persuade governments to change policy as a result. So we shall see. We shall see whether Hugh Ranka-Davies manages to bring a settlement to bear upon the situation, which will get our support as farming unions. If that's not the case, then obviously we shall see where we go.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Thank you, Guto. Can I just ask quickly, John, before you've put your camera off, can I just ask John, I don't think we've come across each other before. Can you just say a little bit about your background and your interest?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, I'm the chair of Bolton for EU. I am the North of England coordinator for the Rejoin EU party. I've been very active in Manchester for Europe. I've been down to all the marches. I was at the EU night of the proms, not the last night, the EU night of the proms, since we've claimed it several years on the trot. And
Great,
obviously the
very much.
National Rejoin marches.
Yeah,
now,
thank you.
Background. Norwegian father, English mother, made in Italy, born in England, all the way through school in Belgium, lived and worked all over the EU. EU is my identity. And here it gets a little bit hard for people.
Yeah.
Brexit stole my identity, stole my rights, stole my citizenship, and I no longer feel I belong in the UK. I feel disgusted by my UK passport, absolutely stained and defiled by it.
Yeah. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, John. And I know many of the members in Wales that also have extensive links with our fellow Europeans in many ways, often family links. So thank you for that,
Caroline. Thanks for the term.
Thank you. One of your fellow members from Bolton got in touch with me earlier today as well, showing an interest in this session. So thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, the only hand I can see up at the moment is Porag. And I do have one or two questions I'd like to ask Guto if we've got time as well. So back to Porag.
I'll defer back to you, actually, Caroline. You go ask the questions.
No, please. Mine is on a slightly different topic. So carry on.
Okay, please. Very good. Guto, so obviously, from your perspective, you're former Conservative. I mean, I'm not sure. Have you actually left the Conservative Party, or what is?
I was kicked out by Boris Johnson.
Right.
And I was offered the whip back, and I wrote a letter which I might publish at some points to the chief whip at the time, saying quite clearly I did not want the whip back. As it happens, being involved with the FUW is much easier to be non-party political anyhow. So no, I'm not a member of any political party at this point.
That's fine. Are you picking up any sort of a tilt towards the Lib Dems, for example? I cannot imagine the farming community tilting towards Labour for some time. It'll take a revolution before that happens, I think. I don't know, but from my own perspective, I think that'll happen. But are you picking up any coalescing around either Plaid, I suppose, or the Lib Dems?
There was some element of the results in Brecon and Radnorshire which indicated an unhappiness with Faye Jones, I might as well be honest.
Right.
Faye Jones was elected. She talked a very good talk for the Welsh farmers and subsequently voted for all the trade deals that Boris Johnson and Liz Truss agreed. And I think that did come back and bite her. Now, I'm not
Yeah.
saying there was a significant change, but let's put it this way. We were fairly comfortable that the Liberal Democrats were going to win that constituency, to the extent that we did actually have the newly elected Liberal Democrats MP for Brecon and Radnorshire on a farm visit with us 4 days after his election. So our information on the ground in Brecon and Radnorshire was pretty clear. Montgomeryshire, which is obviously has been a Liberal Democrat area, I think they are not coming back in Montgomeryshire, is the feeling I'm
No.
getting. The election saw a Labour candidate elected there because of the situation that Craig Williams found himself in.
Yeah.
But what's happened in Montgomeryshire is that what we saw in Montgomeryshire was that the west of the county, where we have a very significant membership in the west of Montgomeryshire, for the first time ever, they came out very strongly for the Plaid candidate. The type of area which would have voted Plaid if it wasn't for in Montgomeryshire, because they're in Montgomeryshire, they felt that the votes were so wasted. So if we saw any movement there, it was towards Plaid. I think what is interesting is somebody like Ben Lake, who hoovered up a blue-green vote in North Pembrokeshire. So if you're asking me, are we seeing any significant move? Not really. My priority from a lobbying perspective is in persuading the Labour Party, who now do have MPs in rural constituencies across Wales, is that they should take up the concerns of Welsh agriculture as well.
Yeah, with you. Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you for that, Guto. I don't think we've got anyone from Montgomeryshire with us tonight, but I am aware that we do have some Lib Dems from Brecon and Radnor with us, so I think they'll probably agree with your analysis. And as the ex-monitoring officer for those two constituencies, who I wasn't at the last election, I'm very aware as well that the boundaries changed significantly, bringing in the Strigan Lice to Brecon and Radnor, and bringing in, well, the southern part of Wrexham, a very Labour traditional area, into Montgomeryshire as well. So there were lots of factors there, but really interesting to hear your observations there. I can't see any other hands up, but my question really was also going into that direction, very similar to Porag's there. When I introduced you, Guto, I mentioned, some very esteemed colleagues of yours that were in a similar position on the 3rd of September 2019. A number of them very sort of highly respected MPs and Conservative Party members and ministers, many of them in the cabinet at the time. Given where the Conservative Party has been over the past 5 years and the results of the recent general election, the Conservative Party are now selecting a new leader. They've narrowed down to 3 possible candidates today, going down to 2 tomorrow. But I just wonder, and you can only speak on behalf of yourself, but as someone who is sort of sitting on the outside looking in at the Conservative Party, who still remains an important political party across the UK, do you think there is any is there an opportunity at some stage for some of those people to return to the Conservative Party and rebalance the party? Or has that era now gone, and will the Conservative Party be going in a different direction in future?
That's a challenging one. I think William Hague has a lot to be responsible for here, because clearly, well, democracy is not always the best thing, is it? So clearly, if you decide that your members can decide who the leader is, then you end up with a problem. And I think there's no problem. There's no doubt that, generally speaking, when the membership have been asked to choose a leader in the Conservative Party, they've gone for the most right-wing option. And obviously, you could argue that the Labour Party as well was saddled with a challenging leader as a result of the members' views as well. So it's not just the Conservative Party. But no, I think it's very challenging, to be perfectly frank. What can I say? It's very difficult to see how a party led by any of the 3 remaining candidates for leader would be able to attract people like David Gork and Dominic Grieve back into the fold. Very difficult. James Cleverly, perhaps, but he was an avowed Brexiteer. He's probably not a cultural warrior in quite the same way as the other 2 who are remaining in the race. But then, I'm going to sound a nasty and vindictive individual now, but I'm quite glad that Tom Tugendhat was knocked out this afternoon, because I remember Tom saying to me when I was trying to persuade him to join the rebels, I remember him saying to me, well, you have to understand, Guto, I've got a French wife, so there's no issue for my children, and I have to think of my career. So I'm glad that his career hasn't progressed as he was hoping for. Now, that sounds very nasty and uncalled for, but ultimately, too many people in the Conservative Party, in my view, decided that their careers depended upon remaining in their roles. And there was no love for Boris Johnson. There was no love whatsoever. People think he's this jovial character who has a lot of friends. That's simply not correct. That's not Boris Johnson. He's always been a bit of a loner. But too many of my colleagues were worried that they were going to lose their seats. We'd had, from the 2017 election onwards, it was a pretty horrendous time to be an MP in Parliament. I came to the conclusion that the ERG were going to win the war win of the Conservative Party because Theresa May kept compromising with them. So I took a decision to resign and fight from within. At the time, I became the whip for the Rebel Alliance because they thought I knew how to do whipping. I'm not sure whether that's true. But I think the problem we have is that far too many of the Conservative Party were tainted by the Boris promise, I'll get you re-elected. And once you're tainted, then you start doing things and saying things that you don't believe. So Robert Jenrick, for example, mild-mannered centrist, a Cameroonian to his core when he was elected in a by-election in 2014. He used to have an office next door to mine. I can't believe the Robert Jenrick I'm seeing these days. Although I wouldn't mind the same tablets as he has to lose some weight, but that's another matter. But generally speaking, I am of the view that people like Dominic Grieve, Oliver Letwin, it's difficult to see how they find a way back. And I think the sad thing about this is people like Philip Hammond, David Gauke, if they'd made their stand earlier, I don't think I was, David Gauke, Philip Hammond, they're very clever individuals. But if I was a junior, I was a Minister for Defence Procurement, if I could spot that the ERG were not going to give up and that Theresa May was not going to get a deal, if I could spot that, then I'm not sure why these people stayed in cabinet until Boris was elected, because by that point, it was probably too late. Now, I still say that we could have snookered Boris, but, events, the SNP and the Liberal Democrats in particular were hungry for an election. Turned out that the SNP were right in 2019 and the Liberals were not.
Great, diolch yn fawr iawn. Wait, 20 past 8, so I'm going to, we've only got one hand up, felly cwestiwn ola I Iwan ap Dafydd, and I think Iwan, from your time in college as well, and of course you mentioned Ceredigion earlier, and Iwan lives in that area. So last question from Iwan, and then we'll wind up the session for this evening.
Yeah, thank you, Guto, for tonight. It's been very interesting. You're talking about, obviously, the Labour Party in Westminster, and you're not getting much of a sort of a wink and a nod that things are going to improve. So, I mean, that's quite depressing to hear that. So we've got the Labour Party who's scared stiff of talking or doing anything about Brexit. We've got the Conservative Party seems to be going more right-wing every day that passes. And of course, they're not going to do anything with Brexit. Now we've got Nigel Farage's Reform Party biting at their heels. Can you give us anything to cheer us up tonight? Because it's not looking good at the moment, really, is it?
Well, and there was an opinion poll out today which showed that the combined Conservative and Brexit or Reform Party vote was on 47%. So, if you could, if you do reunite the right, as it were, then yes, that's not really the type of right I would want to see supported. So, can I give you offer you anything positive? I think the key point is the fact that we still haven't seen Brexit implemented, and the more people realise that Brexit hasn't been implemented, then I think you should be brave. People should be brave enough to highlight the fact that it hasn't worked. All the promises made have not been delivered. If somebody said, "Can you show us the Brexit gains?" What have they got? Jacob Rees-Mogg will still talk about the COVID vaccine process, but the reality is they stopped calling it the Oxford AstraZeneca the minute there was some problems highlighted with it. So, with that one exception, have you heard any Brexiteer highlighting any success? What I hear from avowed Brexiteers is that this is not the Brexit I voted for. That's what I'm hearing. So even those people who are avowed Brexiteers are basically saying, well, this is not what I wanted. And I would say that the Labour Party needs to find a pep. But I think other parties need to be braver as well. Even the Liberal Democrats won those seats and had a significant breakthrough in areas where I suspect Brexit was an issue, but I don't think they campaigned very hard on the Brexit issue. And ultimately, until people start saying that the UK economy is being held back by the decisions that we've taken, it's going to be very difficult to give you any positivity, because if no politician is willing to be brave enough to say part of the problem we have is that our growth is lethargic, we're not performing as we should, and part of that is because we've actually done damage to our economic position ourselves. Until the party is willing to say that, then the lies of the Reform Party types will still resonate.
Because the problem we have, of course, is this thing that, well, we've got Brexit, we've got to make it work. It's never going to work. It never was going to work. And the problem is, I mean, I remember when the Soviet Union collapsed, and I remember hearing a BBC report, and you had these diehard communists in the Soviet Union and Russia, and they came up with the same thing. Nothing wrong with communism. It just wasn't done properly.
It wasn't implemented
it's
properly.
The same nonsense coming out with the Brexit stuff. It just hasn't been done properly. And the reality is Brexit is a turd you just cannot polish. That's the reality of it. And I can't see any way forward until we face that reality that it's just not going to work.
Yeah, I'll just respond quickly. I don't disagree with you, but I would also say that as an organisation with several thousand members in Wales, we do have an obligation to try and make the best of the worst situation that we're facing. So we do have an obligation to say you should be applying border controls on imports in the same way as they had applied on exports, because we would be doing a disservice to our members if we didn't do that. In the same way, I don't think that anything that Welsh Government comes up with in negotiations with the farming union will be better than what we previously had. But we still have to make the case. If you're a musician, you want to travel in Europe, then you will agree with a compromise which gives you something is better than the current position which gives you nothing. So it's difficult. Are you trying to polish the turd, or are you just saying, well, we do have an obligation to mitigate the worst of it, but make the point all the time? It would have been better if we didn't have to waste all this time and effort. And I'll finish on this point. Nobody makes the point that we have an army of civil servants, even in Wales now, trying to create this new farming structure for Wales. And we've been at it for 8.5 years. Okay. And that is a huge amount of effort, a huge amount of expenditure, and it's generated absolutely nothing. So when people say, what has Brexit delivered? Well, Brexit has delivered a huge amount of paperwork. And that paperwork, if any farmer says to me that the NVZ is a disaster imposed by Welsh Government, and they also voted for Brexit, well, what the Welsh Government did with NVZ would not have been possible if it wasn't for Brexit. So there are issues that people are unwilling to highlight. And sometimes you have to highlight these issues. So if politicians are not willing to highlight these issues, then we are stuck. And I don't see any political party out there highlighting these concerns. I don't see any party, even Plaid, is not highlighting these issues.
No.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Guto. And can I just say as well, most of us here are active members of Wales for Europe and other parts of the UK as well. Many of us are part of the European movement, and certainly what you've just summarised there is our position as an organisation. We're clearly, of the view that Brexit cannot be made to work. One of the comments made recently by Keir Starmer since the election is that UK will not be rejoining in his lifetime. Well, I'm just a little bit older than Keir Starmer. I think I'm 2 or 3 years older than him, and I'm absolutely certain we will be rejoining during my lifetime. Yes, I do intend to live for a long, long time, but
maybe he's ill.
I'll just leave it there. But diolch yn fawr iawn I chdi, Guto. Really grateful for this session. It's a sort of session, we want to organise in Wales, so we have a better understanding of the issues as they affect sectors, which then means that we're able to campaign more effectively as an organisation. Felly diolch yn fawr iawn. Ar ran pawb, diolch yn fawr iawn I chdi, Guto.
Croeso.
Thank you very much on behalf of all of us. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Croeso. Ta-ra.